we get to just connect and validate each other's experiences.
This is nurse practitioner Danaya Hall sharing with me what it's meant to her to be a part of the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon.
That's our legacy too, as Black people, is to come together in these spaces where we can be ourselves. We can sort of let go of the armor that we wear as we move through the world.
The organization includes 28 nurses coming from 10 counties throughout Oregon and Southwest Washington. It is the first ever chapter of the National Black Nurses Association in the Pacific Northwest.
We don't have a lot of support in our individual experiences with our patients, with our coworkers, and all those microaggressions and implicit bias that come with that. It's really when you feel isolated in that way and you have those experiences, it's very difficult. You're like, did that just happen?
Danaya initially received a scholarship from the National Black Nurses Association during her time in school in San Francisco. Once she landed in Oregon, she immediately sensed the necessity for the presence of the group.
I had been a longtime member of the National Black Nurses Association here as an individual member because there wasn't a chapter.
Danaya ended up connecting with a local nurse turned activist and politician, Rachel Prusak. Feeling inspired to address the lack of diversity in the nursing field in Oregon, Danaya wasn't sure where to start. At the end of their meeting, Rachel asked Danaya one simple question.
Why don't you just start a chapter?
It's a question that Danaya really took to heart.
I think I put something out on Facebook and people were messaging me. I was messaging them back. That just started the snowball, if you will. And so February 9th, 2020, we charted the chapter.
It's thanks to Danaya that the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon came to be. Welcome to Black Care Matters, the show where we honor the unique experiences of Black nurses working in the Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Rashida Quinn. In recognizing that Black lives matter, it's crucial that the care for these nurses also matters. Cultural white supremacy has had a detrimental impact on the American healthcare system. Each nurse's story reveals rich insights towards the possibilities of a better future. Today, we're honored to speak with Danaya Hall, the former president and founder of the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon. Her passion for healthcare began during her high school years in the Bay Area, a time deeply affected by the AIDS epidemic, instilling in her the importance of showing up for others no matter the situation. Her work ensures the sacrifices of those we've lost are never forgotten. Join us as we delve into her inspiring story and the impact it holds, only on Black Care Matters. I'm curious if there's any memories in your life that you connect to when you want to have a moment of joy.
Where I grew up, we would have a festival every year in the summertime around Juneteenth. And my grandmother would make award-winning lemon pound cake and sweet potato pie.
Oh.
And one year, I was probably in 5th grade, and I asked her if she would teach me how to make sweet potato pie. I just think there's so much Black joy in our food. It's not an accident that it's called soul food.
Yeah.
I continue that tradition with my kids and my community, and I love making sweet potato pie.
Oh, I love that. A literal sweet memory. You're a big fan of Trisha Hershey and the Nap Ministry. She specifically talks about ways that oppressive systems rob the folks that are subjugated by those systems of their rest and therefore their dream space. And so I'm curious how you've reclaimed your dream space.
I mean, one of the things she says is lay your ass down.
Yes.
And I do that. I can hear her in my ear. It's hard to do that, to just stop and lay down and reflect, because there's always stuff to do. And I just think laying down and closing your eyes, that's it. That's all one needs to do.
Yeah.
You don't need to pay for a massage. You don't need to focus on meditating on some specific thing. You just need to stop and rest.
Yeah, and the simplicity makes it accessible from so many different angles. And it makes me immediately think about the history of constant labor that's baked into the Black experience and the history of enslavement and how folks were from a very young age, always in constant motion, are expected to have some sort of productivity. And so the idea of rest as resistance is super powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's really baked into American culture and capitalism that if you aren't doing the thing to stake your claim, there's someone behind you ready to take it from you.
So you grew up in the Bay Area during the 1970s. You've described that area had a sort of wide economic spectrum from extremely affluent to folks who had less resources. What was that experience like for you, and how race played a part in that dynamic?
My grandfather, who had fought in the war and got a GI Bill, and during the Great Migration, when a lot of African Americans were leaving the Jim Crow South, my family came and settled in Marin City, California. And it is a beautiful place geographically.
Oh.
When I was growing up, it was one of the richest counties in the U.S. And the Black community there is nestled in this area where there's one road in and one road out. And it's in this bowl that floods because when the tides get high. And, you know, when we talk about environmental racism, Black people and brown people too, it's like you're allowed to be here and nowhere else.
So literally, those with more resources were on higher ground. This is where your parents met?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. My mom is Jewish and my dad being Black. I definitely struggled with fitting in, the experience of being othered, having that sense of wanting to be darker to fit in with my Black side and wanting to have less curly hair to fit in with my white Jewish side.
I think being a biracial person, having the history of the union between people of different races, specifically Black and white, be literally illegal in our society's government, it makes sense that that space would be isolating because it was not supposed to exist according to the laws of the land. I have a mixed race child, and I know that my experience is going to be drastically different from hers. So I think that's an important thing to share. But what did community support look like where you grew up?
I mean, I grew up in low-income housing with a lot of other people like me, a lot of other mixed race kids. And also where I grew up, there were a lot of Indian folks from Southeast Asia. And so it was this strange little melting pot. The apartments were designed that all of the like decks faced the three different playgrounds. And so, parents could like see their kids from the deck playing at the playground. It was actually a really great place to grow up.
Yeah.
And I still have lasting relationships with some of the folks.
So you've shared that your dad was recruited to the Black Panthers. How does that happen?
I mean, obviously, I don't really know.
Because you weren't recruited.
I have a book that has a lot of photographs of when the Black Panthers came to Marin City to recruit. And there's photos of my dad. That was a time of great activism. I think it was somewhat of a political statement for my mother as a white Jewish woman to, choose my dad and have a child. In the 60s. In the San Francisco Bay Area, there was a lot of drug commerce. And there weren't a lot of opportunities for Black people and Black men, especially didn't have a high school diploma to really make it in the world. And, my dad certainly was a victim of that institutional racism.
When you were 12, by that time, your dad was struggling in that regard, and he ended up losing his struggle. And that was a time you describe connecting to caring and wanting to provide care and maybe the burgeoning nurse within you.
I think that time in my life, he was one of my favorite people on the planet.
Yeah.
And when you love someone so deeply and so fiercely, you want to do whatever you can to help them be and achieve the potential that you know that they can. You want the world to see them in the way that you see them.
Yeah.
I was 10 years old, and I remember my parents being like, okay, like, what do you want to do? Like, let's have a party. And I was like, I'm grown. I don't want to have a party. I want to go out to a fancy dinner. They took me to this restaurant, and it's like up on the hillside. It's just beautiful. And I got all dressed up. The chef came out and he gave me this giant block of chocolate. I mean, it was probably, well, in my child mind, it was like 6 by 6 inches, but it was probably smaller than that. And I remember like hiding it in my underwear drawer and like taking bites out of it. And I feel like I had it in my underwear drawer for a long time because it was so big.
Chocolate. I love it.
But, my father really struggled with addiction, and I saw how it was turning him into someone that he didn't want to be.
Yeah.
And me being the grown-up that I thought I was, I really gave him an ultimatum and was like, you need to clean up your act, or I don't want to have a relationship with you anymore. I think that was, again, that sense of like having a boundary for myself, but also being really honest with this person that I really loved and pleading with them to stay here, be with us with your whole self.
Right.
That's what I'd like to think I bring to nursing. Children are very black and white. And as an adult, there's a lot of gray. And I do feel committed to interacting with patients professionally as really like, just show up. However you need to show up, just show up.
Yeah. It's a powerful message. And I imagine that meeting people where they're at who are showing up and caring for them on a regular basis is a real like testament to the power of being able to do that, because not everybody is. As you move into high school, having already navigated these really adult-sized problems, you continued to dive into helping others through an AIDS awareness program.
Yeah, I remember our student body president somehow had passed a condom availability program at our PTA meeting that no one really showed up for. So it was voted in. We would have condoms available to students at any time. And this happened during the AIDS crisis. Yeah, the community lost their minds and shut it down. But what came out of that was an organization called the Marin AIDS Project helped us start a group that we would meet and learn about safe sex practices. And on Valentine's Day in particular, pass out condoms during lunch and after school. We also became peer educators and we went into our classrooms with cucumbers and bananas. And we would also teach people how STIs are passed from person to person.
I think it's a unique thing to connect to, especially at a young age, and to really find passion and drive because of all the things you could be spending your time doing as a high schooler. And so when you graduated from high school, would you say at that point you had really connected to like wanting to be a healer? And
No,
not yet.
I don't think no. I don't think it was until I had a pregnancy loss that I became interested with how a person conceives and grows another person in their body.
Right.
And then births that person through their body. And so that set me on a course towards midwifery. And I was really interested in home birth.
And how old were you then?
I was probably in my early 20s.
Okay.
I got hired at Planned Parenthood to work as a reproductive health specialist, but it was basically like a medical assistant. But that sent me on a course as a medical assistant for a physician who owned a birth center, and I became a midwifery apprentice there. I realized that I needed a lot more education if I wanted to be a midwife, and so I went to nursing school.
And you were in nursing school in California, finished your AA there, and then decided to move to Portland?
Yep. I had visited Oregon before. It's beautiful here. I knew that it was very white here, and that certainly was concerning coming from living in Oakland.
Right.
I was definitely worried about that, but we took a chance. We came anyways.
Your early years as a nurse here in Oregon, what was your day-to-day like? How would you describe your experience in the labor and delivery ward as a Black nurse here in Oregon?
I mean, I think that my upbringing of belonging to two separate cultures and not belonging to them simultaneously, I probably didn't think too much of it. I cared deeply for my patients. I had lovely friendships with my coworkers. And I think that there were less than a handful of us on my unit that identified as Black. And, you know, there's a level of brotherhood, sisterhood, camaraderie that we see each other in a way that others don't, right? Healthcare in general is pretty conservative, pretty white. There's a lot of assimilation that has to happen. There's a lot of leaving who you are at the door to do your job. And so when you identify those people who see you and you see them, you know, it's really powerful, and you don't have to say anything.
Yeah. Was there a shift after Trump comes into office? I wonder what that felt like in such a specific setting as the healthcare nursing experience from your perspective.
I felt like the overwhelming sense of vulnerability was somewhat unbearable. And I felt the people who were leaders in our department, on our unit, didn't know what to do. And there were times when I had asked to please do something. It became increasingly obvious to me that I had to move on because it just felt unsafe for me to stay there.
Yeah. So ultimately, it was the push to do something else, to grow in a different way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which at the time I would say was somewhat devastating because I felt like that was my dream job. I loved that job. But what's interesting is that what happened with that election really put me on a path that I'm on right now that probably wouldn't have happened. That set in motion for me in terms of going back to school to get my master's and become a nurse practitioner. So I guess it's like that thing of making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah, you and Beyonce.
Hey, girl, hey.
Well, what you're saying, I think, is a collective realization that took place around the ways in which Trump's presidency didn't actually bring new information to the reality of racism in our country. It sort of uncovered it. And I think it did become a catalyst for a lot of different elements of activism from both sides, right? We saw the Proud Boys and the MAGA movement be birthed and given speed. And then we also saw Black Lives Matter given its energy. And it sounds like yours drove you towards even a more elevated height within your career as a nurse practitioner and getting your master's. So there's such a consistent thread of a troubling experience or a recognition of a space that needs care, or even just a specific person that needs care, or community being a driving factor in your growth. I mentioned a coworker, Walisha, who was a support and an inspiration as well, and her story being a part of your passion to create community for Black nurses. Would you like to share a little more about who she was to you?
She was a lovely, lovely individual who's no longer with us. We shared similar experiences in our workplace of just feeling vulnerable and wanting to know what we could do to help the institution be more inclusive and to figure out how to get more diversity in the nursing workforce. And I feel like it definitely has been her spirit that has been driving me to do this thing. And having the scholarship in her name, we memorialize those who we have lost in our community through scholarships for our nursing students. And so it was really important to me to keep her legacy alive because that was a relationship that was very dear to my heart.
I love the fact that those who receive the scholarship in her name and come in contact with AbNow, which she, from the other side, inspired the creation of, are linking to make sure that isolation is not a defining part of their story.
It's such a beautiful community, especially here in Oregon, because we do all work, most of us, in areas where we are alone.
It's an extreme experience, that isolation, and it makes me think about the different ways as Black folks come together and start unpacking what it's been like individually and collectively to navigate racism. I'm curious what advice you have for young Black students in the Pacific Northwest.
I guess my advice to any young person who is going to have to take the path less traveled to something that they're inspired to do, to just keep doing, like keep going and keep finding those little pathways that might take you off course a little bit, but in the end, it's probably really going to give you this breadth of confidence. There's a lot of pressure to be put on you to do things a certain way because that's the path that's mapped out for people who have the privilege to take out loans to go to college or have grandparents and, generational wealth. I didn't have any of that. And so it took me longer to get where I am. And I don't have any remorse or regret around that. Like, it is what it is. And I arrived, period.
I think that's a powerful message for folks, no matter what part of their path they're on. Just starting, somewhere in the middle.
I mean, I think it's just putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. It kind of speaks to the message you were sharing earlier of to show up with what you have and whatever that looks like. There's this real humble human approach to resilience that has taken you to great heights from beginnings that were humble. And I think that's a powerful thing because it will reach so many different people who are listening to this, no matter what their perspective is. So thank you for sharing so generously with our community. And thank you for sharing with me. It's been a joy to speak with you today.
Yeah, thank you, Rashida.
You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. That is an excerpt from Mary Oliver's poem, Wild Geese. My conversation with Danaya seemed to be a dance with that poem. From her sweet childhood love affair with a chocolate bar to the deep love she had for her father through his struggle with drug addiction and the heart-to-heart connection she had with her coworker, Walisha, whose life and passing inspired the birth of the first chapter of the Black Nurses Association in the Pacific Northwest. Her ability to keep churning love and loss into something that provides more care and more support for some other soft animal is deeply enduring and unique. She is a biracial woman who identifies as Jewish and Black, and I can feel those who have gone before her reaching through her efforts, elongating that lineage of resilience. Being present amid hardship so you can be present and know what is needed to facilitate healing. Indeed, I met Danaya in this same energy. My first career was in early childhood education and postpartum support. I have the honor of caring for her 2 infants as she moved through caring for her mother, who was ill. This trust around the exchange of care has taken us up through 13 years into today, this work right here. There would be no Black Care Matters podcast without us 2 Black women caring for each other's needs since the day we met. Our relationship is a testament to community and a genuine desire to offer support through the gritty and raw demands life is full of. I am so proud of who we are and the space we take up in the family of things. Black care indeed matters. Black Care Matters is presented by the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, sponsored by the Oregon Center for Nursing, and was recorded at KBOO Studios here in Portland, Oregon. This episode was produced by Ida Hardin, with production support and mix mastering by Ramoy Phillip. Our executive producer and host, myself, Rashida Quinn. The Black Care Matters podcast website was designed by Brendan Quinn, with portrait art created by Ryan Alexander Tanner. Special thanks to Danaya Hall of the Alliance of Black Nurses Association of Oregon, Kelly Castanegro, and our team at KBOO, Jezaniah Hawthorne, Zoe Ezekiels, and Selena Flores. This podcast would not be possible without the generous grant from Oregon Center for Nursing. Thank you to our grant team, Rick Allgeier, Don Schoenthal, and Callie Giesler. And here's a special invite to all of you, our listeners. Please engage with what you hear and learn on Black Care Matters. Did listening to an episode remind you of a racialized experience you had in healthcare? Did it strengthen your commitment to anti-racism in your own workplace or community? Did it bring up questions about how you can better speak out against white supremacy culture? Please reach out with your questions and comments at blackcarematters.org/contact. We would love to feature our listeners' feedback on a special episode of Black Care Matters. Your voice matters. Listen to Black Care Matters wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, why don't you leave us a review? Your words really do help us reach a wider audience. It's been a pleasure sharing this with you. We'll have a new conversation for you next month. Until then, remember, Black care does matter. It's a matter of how we make those words count.